Have you ever had a day that sticks clearly in your memory? I do. February 16th, 2015, to be precise. Started out like any other. I went to work, nothing spectacularly happened that day. I did bring in a bag of coffee, first time I've ever had like ground bag. It's Starbucks because I was a pleb with no taste. And I basically just tried to use it and probably failed at using a coffee press. Um, Nothing else about that sticks out to like home. I distinctly remember turning on Arrow during dinner. It was the episode or episodes with Vinnie Jones in it. So I don't know how that sticks in the recesses of my brain, but there we are. I was talking to a friend at the time, and I remember distinctly having an odd feeling. There's something I couldn't really shake. Just back in the tinge of my, I just couldn't put my finger on what. I'd moved out like a week prior. First time I lived out of my family home. So my friends actually came to see me. Um, Mini housewarming, you could call it. Sorry, he's going to visit. Very unannounced. That didn't last very long because I got a call from my mother. My dad was in the A&E. To get across how unexpected this was, I actually remember asking her if it was my grandfather, her father, who had fallen and ended up in the A&E. He was in his 70s at the time. My mom said no, it was my dad. So I asked my friends to go home while I waited in anxiety for my mother to show up. Ugh, the drive to the hospital was an experience. If you're not from here, there's an event that happens around this time of year called Raise and Give or RAG Week. It's meant to be a charity thing where people get together and raise money for certain causes, but it's an excuse for a piss up. It's students basically going on a tear and getting ranked. As most celebrations and events in Ireland tend to be. I lived close enough to UCC at the time, and the place I lived in was a popular enough student accommodation place, though they were kind of phasing that out in terms of like families or working adults. And there was chaos everywhere. I distinctly remember overturned bins blocking our path at one point. Gone from annoyance to that week to utterly despising it. My dad's entire family were in the CUH. I rushed to him. He was lying on a stretcher. There was blood pooling out of the back of his head. To be honest, I don't think he was alive when he arrived at the hospital. I think they were just waiting for me to say goodbye before they called it. After they did so, I ran out into the ambulance bay and just screamed like a guttural scream. It's hard to tell if you don't know me in person. Very animated, and I am kind of very passionate when I get into certain things that impress me. You get loud, twist out, and I can talk really fast. But I'm actually a fairly taciturn, docile person. It actually takes a lot to get me actually legitimately angry or upset or that emotional. So I have no idea where that came from to this day. Maybe it was just a normal way to react to that, I suppose. I didn't know what else to do. My best friend, who was just one of the most amazing people I've ever met, could tell how much I needed someone when I called her, so she hopped into a cab in the middle of the night and drove across the city to just be with me. My family was numb. I badly needed someone. I remember telling one of my housemates and my friends why I wasn't coming home, and yet that he passed. And I called my other best friend, and we just talked for a bit. It was late, so it definitely was that long. We sat outside for ages, just chatting. Around like crowded spaces. Then the rituals. He was blessed. People started slowly moving away from this like small room we were kind of hobbled into, where his body was being laid. Finally, his partner left myself, my mom, and my sister alone with him. I remember touching his hand, and I never felt it so cold. I never realized how cold and pale a dead body can get. Like a few hours after the person was like full of life. It's not really something you can be told, and it's something that's hard to forget. This is a video about Aftersun, and it isn't.
Come on, come on, come on, get through it. Come on, come on, come on.
We were on holidays a few years back. I believe I was 14 and it was Santa Ponza. We were like in these kind of high-rise little apartments, you know, one on top of the other. We had booked a tour bus to go to something. So my dad was going down to ask the receptionist what the story was. It was like 6 a.m. and he's like, I have to sleep. He comes back up, get back to the room, and it's locked. He just can't get back in. Eventually, he just gets really angry, starts hammering at the glass door, being like, open this fucking door! Could probably tell it was the wrong room. So these flats are like two identical pillars, like stacked on top of the other, and he had just walked up the wrong one. Realized his mistake and came in after he was yelling blue murder at this random family who had no idea who he was. So I've never seen him so beet red. We never let him live that time. Aftersun's a pretty good movie. One of the things I want to explore is the film's one of the film's main themes and kind of its broader implications overall and how it can resonate with people. On the surface, it's straightforward enough. It's a woman reflecting on a holiday her and her father took when she was 11 and it was close to both their birthdays. The thing is, that's the plot. We're more looking for the story. What's important about the film is that it's a rather subtextual one. You are not told a lot. What is happening is more expressed to you in visuals and like smaller details. For example, it's never really told that the father Callum is struggling for money. We're shown this through examples of him losing an expensive scuba mask and his reaction to that, and him sneaking onto a resort from the hotel they're staying in, which is a lot cheaper looking. We're not even really told that the film is from adult Sophie's perspective. We see a few shots of her as an adult. It gets fully confirmed it's her near the end of the second act. Then near the end, there's a pan from DV footage to her reaction, showing that she's been watching it, which implies that, you know, this is from her remembering this holiday. A lot of other fixtures like the extreme Sophie POVs that we see, that infers that this is the case, that we are seeing it from her memory. This stuff is obvious, but it primes us to realize the film is showing us a lot without telling us. The most annoying film bro you know will be delighted. One example of this is the indication that Sophie is beginning to understand her own sexuality. We see her interest in another boy and they end up kissing. This doesn't seem to really stick in her mind as much, but we do see after this two older boys kissing that she's spying in on. It's a lot more passionate and it's a lot more pointed. Shortly after this, when you get to reveal that the adult we're seeing in these kind of rave sequences is Sophie, it's her wife in bed next to her wishing her a happy birthday. Where this gets really interesting is how the film communicates Callum's depression. We see signs like he has a lot of self-help books and he's learning Tai Chi, casual way he makes himself bleed when he's self-administering treating a bandage, or the implications that he has a terrible sleeping pattern. But he goes even beyond this. He seems to have trouble holding down a relationship. He really beats himself up over how he feels about not being able to take care of his daughter, and he's extremely impulsive in ways to make himself feel better. Stuff like him looking like shit after the scuba mask goes missing, or he buys a carpet after saying he can't afford it. It really indicates a lot about the way his self-esteem is matter through materialism and how he feels he needs to provide and be an adult and spend all this stuff. We get a sense with the carpet scene that he instantly regrets buying it, but it gives him a sense of control he feels is slipping away from his life. All of this becomes a lot more obvious in the scene where he walks towards the ocean after him and Sophie fight. So there's a lot more going on, right? Is this movie about depression, or is this movie about Sophie reflecting on her father? Be a bit of both. The movie's director, Charlotte Wells, talks about how she is hesitant to be too direct about what the film is about, which I think is better off personally. But she has hinted that the focus on parental loss is a lot closer to the bone.
I think there's also many paths through the film, in a strange, choose-your-own-adventure to reach the same conclusion kind of way. The first time we screened it in a feedback screening, collectively, the room understood it far beyond what we expected. Every individual contributed some part of that. No individual stood up and articulated every nuance of the film from beginning to end. But collectively, the room did. I see so many readings on the film, and I'm very reluctant to invalidate them, because the core expression is kind of similar, regardless of your take. But I think there is one line through the film that is closer to mine, and I think that's the one.
That last quote was even in response to a question about how those who lost a parent resonated with the film. So, in essence, the plot here is about Sophie as an adult reflecting on a holiday her and her father took when she was younger via home video, with the added weight that Callum is dead, which the film always states. So the key theme here is memory, which is something we can explore. Not so much that it is the major theme of the film, but why this is important for how Sophie reflects on her feelings about her dad. When I was around 8 maybe, I bit my sister. Why? I do not know. Autism mayhaps. We were going away at the time, and my parents needed to resolve this because, and rightfully so, my sister was angry with me. My dad decided the best way to do it was for him to bite me. To make it even, it would hopefully pacify her. So he wasn't going to actually bite me, but he wanted to pretend to do it, and for me to react. He told me to react like I had been bitten. He was betting on a wrong horse here, really. So he proceeded to bite me, and I left off the most pitiful ever admitted. Whether or not to satiated my sister, I do not know. I cannot imagine, even at her age, she's 4 years younger than me, she bought that. What's important when examining the broader aspects of this film's emotional resonance is to take things that aren't said, the smaller details that let you in. For example, while we do not know adult Sophie's precise age, we can assert that this is roughly 20 years into the future of the Turkish holiday, meaning she would be the same age as Callum was at that point. I'm not there myself if I make it, but I can imagine getting older than your parent was when they died must hit weird in your brain somehow. Another is the baby, Sophie and her wife have a child. I have to wonder if this is playing into how she reflects on her father's behavior and actions on this holiday. This is also, if not right before Callum dies, then really fucking close, because the final shot is him leaving the airport going into the rave. She's thinking about the last time she saw her father alive 20 years ago, almost to the day as they went on this holiday during their birthdays, which are very close together. One of the things that stands out about the film is the lack of moments feeling interconnected from one to another. Not that there are none, but far less than usual, and scenes just kind of float together. Now usually in film we have these kind of bridging moments or shots. They're establishing shots to affect and indicate that time has passed, like the famous spinning newspaper reels you see in some films, or something as simple as opening on a Y to indicate we are entering a new location. We can even get this in montage. It can even be represented in a brief scene or exchange of dialogue. An example of this is from my favorite film, known as Sunshine. The famous Do What You Love scene. You could just cut to Dwayne and Frank standing outside the pier without indicating that they had left the hotel where the beauty pageant is happening. However, adding this,
let's get out of here.
It only gives us a sense that Dwayne is ready to talk, as he had been more silent than usual after he had broken his vow, but it gives the audience a greater sense of continual flow. This isn't really as prominent a beat in Aftersun. A moment that stands out to me again is Sophie after kissing another boy after fighting with her father. We cut back to Sophie just arriving at the hotel. We never see her being guided from this little pool that they kiss at until this moment she's there. I think these more flowing, vibing sense of these moments feeling more stapled together subconsciously tells you the framing of this film is a lot more subjective. We're not seeing how these scenes play out, we're seeing these scenes through Sophie's eyes. Sometimes literally in the case that the camera will do these extreme close-ups like I mentioned, maybe showing her examining Callum's facial features, something Wells notes in the audio commentary.
The idea that you're remembering parts of people, eyes, hands, with a view of trying to piece them back together after the fact.
I love this, and I think it's such an accurate way of getting these little details of how we piece someone back together. I talk a lot about these stories of Dad when I want to remember him. I think of stuff like whenever he was cooking pasta, if he wanted to see it had finished cooking, he would fling it onto the kitchen roof to see if it stuck. There used to be a lot of dry pasta on that roof when I was growing up, and my mother loved that. Or I always knew if my mom made her lunches or my dad, because not only would my dad have them caked in butter, sometimes there would also be tobacco. Also, my dad lost his 2 front teeth in a hurling accident when he was younger. So he eventually got implants, but I think I was in my 20s by the time he got those. And he used to just have 2 fake teeth and he used to play with his tongue, which was disgusting. Remember, he used to make this little noise through them as well, and I think I've kind of just imitated that because I find myself doing it sometimes. We piece back together through the details and fixations of what we keep. So how is Sophie trying to piece her father back? I think one of the ways we can ascertain this is that a lot of the events of this film appear to be looked back on with a different lens than maybe they were actually experienced or explored before. I'm always taken aback by the karaoke experience while Callum was being unfair and letting Sophie feel humiliated by singing the song on her own. He seems softer and less aggressive than what you'd expect, and her response is just a lot colder. You also take in an earlier moment where Sophie was clearly uncomfortable playing in the pool with the teens and Callum talks her into it. I definitely feel there maybe would be a lot more aggression between both here, but I don't believe Sophie is looking back at it as an adult wanting to be more angry at her father. I'm not saying this isn't how it happened, it's more reframed in a sympathetic lens to how her dad reacted. Remember, all of this is subjective. Now, she is justified given what happened, but it feels like Sophie's remembering Callum coming across a little less aggressive. Think more Rashomon than, I know, there's an episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer where the kind of dweeby, cowardly character Andrew is remembering a scene from earlier on in the series where he comes across as a lot more braver and stronger than he actually is. Yeah, that's a great, fun, quick comparison. Everyone's going to say, good job, great, brilliant, I'm a good YouTuber. Maybe this was a moment where his jovial persona really broke and she doesn't want to remember her father being as venomous. Nothing in the movie really supports this definitively, it's just a vibe I get. It also adds to the fact that Sophie is likely trying to recontextualize how her father behaved from maybe hints and clues. One example is right after this fight at the mud bath trip where Callum apologizes. Sophie seems to shrug it off, but it appears she's remembering in a much more pointed way at the moment, as it was important to Callum at the time than she realized at 11. Of course, all this brings into question if this is from Sophie's adult perspective and it's from her memory.
How did you know about the parts you weren't there for?
There are several scenes in the film without Sophie at all, just Callum. While there were moments where it's questionable where she witnessed it or not, two of the moments she absolutely did not are two of the most important. That him buying the carpet and walking into the ocean. Now, for the carpet, you obviously can infer what happened, even ignoring the fact that, I mean, he had to have brought the carpet through the airport with him. She owns it in the present day sequence we see later on. This to me re-emphasizes Callum's impulsiveness to her. Note that what triggers the ocean walk is Sophie throwing this in his face when he offers to pay for her singing lessons. Oh yeah, the ocean scene. I don't think I have to tell you what this represents or what I tell Sophie about her dad. The funny thing is, when she walks into her dad asleep on a bed, it shows very little indication that he did go swimming. You know, he's bone dry, there's no clothes in the shot, etc. Just for once he's asleep earlier than her, which is a rarity as he's had trouble sleeping. Also, he's naked, which, again, I think if he was in the right state of mind, he wouldn't have done that. Before his daughter is clearly awake, but maybe it's obvious by some hints we haven't seen. Maybe she just assumed this is what he did. But what this tells us is one thing, as this leads to the flash forward to the present day, that Sophie, years after he's clearly passed, is considering why he was there, what caused him to do what he did. Taking these moments, these details, and piecing them back together, inevitably it makes another picture. She does what memory does best, changes how it looks through time. Dad and I went to Eddie Rockets. If you're not from here, it's like a burger chain which has this like 1950s Americana style to it, and the burgers are enormous. They're also really expensive. Once we had eaten, his eyes nearly bulged out of his head when he saw the bill. He leaned into me and asked me if we should rock. I was like, no, I'm not going to dine and dash this place. I went there a bit at this time when I could anyway. I had a lot more money for bougie themed restaurants when I was 19, fancy that. This basically ended the entire exchange. But I remember being annoyed that I was just a lot more mature than my dad. A couple of days after he died, I went to a movie. This is before the funeral, so maybe weird behavior, but I needed to be alone. I needed to get out of that environment for a little bit anyway. I stopped at a cafe after. I was sitting there and the story popped into my head. I laughed. He was right too. Fuck Eddie Rockets. If you're listening to this, Eddie Rockets, my dead father was right to try to dine and dashy. Your burgers aren't good enough for how expensive they are. Who am I kidding? They're probably the same price as McDonald's is now. Have you ever had a day that stuck clearly in your memory? Are you sure it did? Because I think memory's a lot more fallible than we like to think it is. We seem to have this idea that memory can be this kind of infallible, sacrosanct thing that creates our personalities, yet we take to the fact that our brains are these kind of flabby bags of meat that, have a limited range in how it holds details. And it goes further than not remembering very specific things that how they happened. I mean, sometimes your precious memories may not have been how it happened in reality, even my own, as I have relayed to you in this video. There's a belief in neuroscience that memory is more adaptive. We don't base it on an actual objective read of what happened. More we reassess what we remember and lose key details over time in a way that protects us, like forgetting embarrassing details or more pernicious elements. It tends to put us into a more nostalgic place. This can be something as meaningless as not wanting to remember the awkward silence when you said something stupid at a party, to potentially putting the wrong people behind bars and admitting to crimes you never committed. There is also a tactile factor to memory. Certain smells or auditory stimuli can occur to construct the facsimile of a memory, like a feeling made visual, rather than the actual, real, tangible reality. This is something Aftersun explores a lot, where it takes the soundscape and then the extreme close-ups to create a more airy, ethereal mood of what Sophie is kind of half remembering things based on sensations that are stuck in her recall. Outside factors can have an adverse effect on how we remember things, such as gender stereotyping, or in this case, a broader awareness of mental health that may have put Callum's actions in a different perceived light to Sophie. One of the ways memory can be broken down is reproductive and reconstructive. Reproductive is more rote learned, stuff we don't tend to have to struggle to put together to remember. Reconstructive is the opposite then, it's what we piece together to recall and therefore could be considered more unreliable. One could argue Sophie is using reconstructive memory throughout the film, and in a way she is, but you also have to consider she's watching the DV recording of the holiday with her dad. While a lot of studies have concluded the way we take photos and videos now is actually really terrible for our memory, as it offloads the work to our cameras rather than our brains, taking specific photos and videos is actually a pretty strong visual aid that can help it along. Especially as Sophie is watching carefully chosen moments. Those DV cameras had like an hour of memory from 20 years ago. It actually helped her a lot to remember these certain events. And I want to be careful here, because to imply memory is 100% subjective is dangerous. Especially as, while it can hurt criminal cases, some crimes, like sexual based ones, happened years prior, can unfortunately rely entirely on testimonials. To dismiss memory entirely is not what we should do here, but we need to consider the subjective lens taken on this movie. It's not about remembering a horrific crime, it's about recalling a blissful moment that takes place before tragedy struck. Memory, to me, is where material reality meets emotional resonance, and emotions change. And it should change for Sophie to reassess what her relationship to her dad meant after his death. And I feel the same here, because if that doesn't change, then he's truly gone. I'm 12 and I'm sitting in a car with dad. He starts playing a song. He loves the music, mostly country and trad, loved Irish bands. This one wasn't an Irish musician. It was a Willie Nelson song called Across the Borderline. When he played it, he turned to me and said that when he died, he wanted the song played at his funeral. First of all, amazing to put into a head of a 12-year-old. Thanks, Dad. Second, if you actually listen to the song, the lyrics, it's not exactly a mourning tune. It's about how immigrants who go to the United States based on the promise and dangling hope come to realize it's a crock of shite, but are trapped in their circumstances with no better options. Depressing, yes. But my father had never ever left Cork or lived outside of it, so I don't know exactly why he related to it so much. Alas, it did not matter. When he died, I insisted to everyone who would listen to me that this song be played. We played it when the coffin was being lifted out of church. Okay. I don't know why this is so hard. Um, I spent a lot of time hating my dad. Sorry, it's like, oh, it's such lovely little memories and things of. Oh, I hated him. I don't mean the angsty thing of, oh, my parents never got me a PlayStation thing. Like, I had legitimate grievances and anger towards the way he treated me. Now, I am an open book. I would have to be to talk about all the stuff I'm talking about in this video, but I'm not in the business of just spilling all my dirty laundry in a public platform for all the vultures to pick apart for the sense of likes and shares. More importantly, I have a very different perspective on my dad than other members of my family, and in the very, very unlikely case that they are watching this They don't deserve to hear all of this. This isn't fair. It's not the person they loved. I will say that he wasn't some abusive monster, otherwise I wouldn't speak about him like I do in this video. But no, he did hurt me. I feel my reasons are valid. You don't have to know about them. There is a lot more talk about difficult parent-child relationships than was left room for before. Probably one of the most publicized ones in recent memory is Janelle McCurdy's sensationally titled I'm Glad My Mom Died. On the fictional fronts, I think of BoJack Horseman. One of the most celebrated episodes of that series, Free Churro, is entirely Will Arnett's monologue about how BoJack feels about his mother.
I'm your son. All I had was you.
What drove Beatrice apart for me is the show doesn't outright show her as a monster. She's someone who dealt with a lot of her own trauma and paralyzing self-hatred that she has set onto her son. Now, this doesn't make it right, obviously. And if you've seen the show, you know that BoJack isn't exactly the perfect horse either, but it's a lot more nuanced than we tend to get, because abusive or neglective parenting is either depicted monstrously or the behavior is completely downplayed in fiction. And there's a lot here I can connect to. Was my father as bad as Beatrice, or did he have as bad an upbringing? I mean, no. He never secretly drugged someone to make them lose weight, and he didn't watch his mother get lobotomized. But I know he didn't have an easy upbringing, and I think a lot of that shaped how he approached me. Both BoJack and McCurdy's book were discussed in my friend Mainly Mandy's video about adults going no contact with their parents, focusing on how she did so with her own mother. There is a lot I connected to here, though her experience with her mother is a lot different than what I went through with my dad. I don't want to say worse, like I instinctually want to, because all these experiences are different. It doesn't mitigate the hurt. Anyway, I played the beat my parental trauma game with my friends, and I tend to lose because said parent is dead. Take your crown, bitches. Okay. I'm giving my father a lot of shit here, and I like to think he would be somewhat okay with it, if not just kind of begrudgingly accept it. That one is probably the one that goes too far. One of the many things Mandy brings up in her video is how these fraught parental relationships can come and go in cycles of no contact. And I felt that really personally because in the last year of my father's life, I basically did not contact him. To be more specific, I said to myself I wouldn't make the effort to contact him. He had to do it. He had to reach out to me. Outside of one instance where it was to talk about some family get-together, this worked. I barely heard from him. And I wish him happy birthday, and he said thank you. Then he got back to me completely unprompted out of nowhere. I did not contact him to compliment me on an article I had written. I don't even remember what I said to him. Probably rambled on about some stupid bullshit because I am terrible at taking compliments. That hasn't changed. 3 days later, he was dead. The last time I ever spoke to him, and I do not know what I even fucking said to him, as I've lost those texts long ago. Into the ultimate and universal ash. When I saw his body, the first thing I said was, I'm sorry. My mom immediately pulled me aside and said I had nothing to apologize for. She was right. I knew that logically, but not emotionally for a long time. I did nothing wrong. And yes, after all this, yeah, I do miss him. Parts of him anyway. When he was affable, his unusual intelligence, how funny he could be, how open-hearted he was. But you can't take the good without the bad at the end of the day. And it's probably he would have never changed. I found out later on, he was talked into reaching out to me because a family member had told him to get in contact after he had finally gotten free texts. For the zygotes in my audience, we used to have to pay for every text, which even by 2015 had been kind of outmoded, but my father was technologically illiterate. That is something he has passed on to myself. I never talked to said family member about how I felt. They had no reason to take my side. They could have just taken Dad's, but they told him to be the one to reach out to me and to talk to me, and I very much appreciate that they did that. I think there's a part of us that always wants our parents to be better people, especially when they're not. Would I have cut him out completely had he survived? I don't know. It doesn't matter now, does it? But it's clearly important to me that I keep the memory of him alive. And this desire is specific to me. It's my way of dealing with my relationship with him. Nobody is under any obligation to change how they feel about their parents and how they have been hurt, whether they are alive or not. But I guess after 10 years of anger and resentment that he wasn't better, it's just kind of dissipated, and that was caused by a changed relationship. Mandy's video touched on these changes, not with her own mother, but in general talked about how parents have to make the effort to talk to their children and make a change in that bond. Dad cannot do that, which is a market change because he could talk the feckin' ear off you. So what helps is taking a new perspective on what he means to me at this point in my life. The desire to keep a loved one alive, in some sense, after they're gone is palpable. A lot of people turn to a more spiritual place. Now, I'm not going to be the angry atheist because I don't have all the answers. I am a lonely being on a densely populated rock careening through an unending cosmos. But I don't believe that. I don't think there's anything beyond this plane. This is it. So if I want him to stay with me in some form, that relationship needs to change. I don't think the anger and hurt is fully representative of who he was as a person. This doesn't exonerate him in any way, but I don't want to pretend he was wholly awful. He was awful, and he should have been better. But I'm at a place where I can at least come to terms with that and have a more rounded reflection of who he was and what he meant to me. Because he meant a lot. And I do love him. Why else would I have such great memories? It's Christmas time, and it's a pretty rough time where I do not want to see my father. The last time I mentioned him on this channel, I talked about how much I love Christmas and keeping these traditions going. So this was a big deal for me to want to do so. I eventually resigned myself to see him and had bought a gift prior to me not wanting to before I changed my mind. Now, I didn't think of it much really. It was a photo I got framed of my first day in school. It was myself, my sister, and him. We're standing in his mother's house, and I give him the gift. He opens it, immediately breaks into tears, rushes over to hug me. Well, I was mean to him in the last part. Guess it's fair to end on something nice. There's a beat in the rave scene at the end of the film. You probably remember it. It's the under pressure scene. And adult Sophie yells at her father. It's brief, but it's potent and completely caught me where it needed to. I could feel that intense feeling of rage. Even with my pretty terrible relationship with my own father, I think it just applies to losing someone when you're younger. Why aren't you here for me? Why did you go? Sophie felt that at 11. I feel Wells felt that at 17. I definitely felt that at 24. Maybe we're always too young to see someone go. The idea of revisiting memory to revitalize the image of someone seems important to Wells, as she seems to have come to this in a rather subconscious way while she was writing the script, and where the rave motif came in.
The process of revisiting memory with a new perspective seeped into the story itself. When I came to actually write the script, it opened with a rave, and that sequence came from some other place. And that is the greatest joy in writing for me, is discovering what you didn't know would be there. It became inextricable from the film. It couldn't be removed because it ultimately was the feeling and expressed the feeling that the film culminated to.
I think there's a lot you can read into the rave. And ultimately, yes, it would be impossible to have the film without it. To me, it's Sophie's connection to her father, her reaching into the recesses of her mind and pulling out a more fully formed human being. There's a lot we don't understand about our parents when we're younger that we kind of put together as we come on through time, and they become a lot more of a real human being to us. Though usually this happens, we grow up with them, not remembering in the past because they aren't here. And it feels like that Wells is almost trying to understand her own father, even though she has said that Sophie is a character, it's not fully based on her. That feeling Sophie came to was her trying to understand someone that was far beyond her reach, to be comforted by him again. Aftersun made me reflect on my own relationship with my own father long gone, how it was a path forged by reflection and pain. But I feel it's coming to a place where I'm okay. Again, not giving him a fair ride of how notably flawed he was and how shitty our relationship had been, but coming to a place where I'm more at peace with that and I can just enjoy the great times I have had with him. Another important facet is holding on to pieces of what is left to keep that person going. I mentioned the video being so important to Sophie's memory, but there isn't a lot of videos of my dad. There's plenty of photos, and some video, but not a hell of a lot of it. And I struggle to remember his voice. It can come to me, but I need to really focus on it. And I know my uncle has a video of him, but paradoxically, I don't know if I want to see it because once I do, that's it. No more things of that to discover. Maybe I'm being silly here. Then my memory goes on in 10 years, maybe 20, maybe 40. All of this will still be solid. To keep his memory evolving and alive keeps him fresh in my mind. Knowing that part of him is not a static thing but an organically changing entity can help me move on from the loss. And who knows, in 10 years' time, maybe 20, maybe in 40. If I get there, I'll be sure to tell you.
There's a land where I've been told every street is paved with gold, and it's just across the borderline. When it's time to take your turn, there's a lesson that you must learn. You could lose more than you'll ever find. When you reach the broken promised land, every dream slips through your hand, you'll know it's too late to change your mind. 'Cause you've paid the price to go so far, just to wind up where you are, and you're still just across the borderline.